So yeah, like I said, this case is designed, was designed to kind of be a like kind of studio sound design synth, and also something to play live. This is basically all I've got. This case, this mixer and my drum machine, and like some pedals I bought when I was like 16 and like banging to death metal, which is still great. But that's kind of all I've got. So this was designed to be really, really multifunctional. So it's a 2-voice synth. So you've got 2 oscillators. One is, yeah, this kind of nice digital one. Which has got loads of different waveforms in it, including some kind of percussive stuff. Some pretty kind of chaotic stuff. I'm actually thinking of selling this, so if anyone wants to buy braids, hit me up. There's this, which is actually the first module I ever bought, and it is a filth machine. So I do an awful lot of sound design just with this. Just lots of layering, lots of modulation. It's great with, you know, a bit of kind of reverb on it. It sings. It's a digital oscillator. It's basically 2 oscillators that you can kind of use to cross-modulate each other with various different algorithms. I don't understand how it works. I bought it on a whim because if you go on, this company's called Noise Engineering. If you go on their website, there's a quote from a guy called Surgeon, who some people might know. He's a bit of a legend, to say the least, techno, and it literally just said I could fucking kill people with this thing. So I was like, cool, need one of those, and it has not let me down. I've had it for like 4 years. It's the best thing in the world. The Loquelica Terratas. All of the Noise Engineering stuff has weird semi-Latin names, which is sometimes annoying, but it makes you sound very fancy when people ask you what you're using, which I like. So with oscillators in kind of modular format, as long as they're receiving power, they will just output sound. You know, I have no way of silencing it, about creating kind of rests or space between notes. This is great if you're making drone music, but basically terrible if you're trying to do anything else. That's where this guy comes in. Very kind of satanic looking module. This is the VCA that I patched in earlier. It's just 6 VCAs cascading. It's quite good because they're all squeezed in. And then you've got some out at the bottom, so you can take everything out at once. And it's got a weird hexagram on it, which is cool. Because, you know, rock and roll. The little multiple next to it, which is signal splitter. Continuing the theme of really evil stuff. This module is called the Plague Bearer. And it's a distortion, which is very good at kind of pretty much just completely decimating stuff. And gives you lots of kind of like, yeah, really nice high gain feedback. I usually run a mic through that live and it just feeds back all the time, which is great. 2 filters, 1 for each voice. And then this is kind of mostly effects, but I'll get into that in a minute. This bottom bit is a sequencer, so a kind of 4 output gate and CV sequencer, so you can use it for pitch and rhythm. Next to it, one called the voltage block, which is probably one of my favorites. It's 8 sequencers, but you can kind of play it, and you can see the LEDs pinging off, but it will effectively remember whatever you play into it. So which means if you've got, say, an oscillator going in, woo, we can patch something into it. So you can kind of get it, there we go. You can kind of play stuff into it, which is great for live use. Or without the sequencer running into it, it's really good as like a kind of a macro controller. You can split obviously all the outputs, and you can just use these to control things. But rather than having to go around and tweak knobs, you've just got one module there with 8 outs. You can kind of use for tuning things, finding sweet spots, and like that. You can also use it to almost like a preset saver, which is handy. 2 envelopes on sliders. There's a lot of sliders on the bottom. I like sliders. It's good. It gives you a very good visual representation of what something is doing. So yeah, 2 envelopes that are manually triggerable. Very handy for doing, you know, kind of like hits and kind of like percussive sound design, because you can just sit and go ding, rather than having to, you know, set a clock up and get it to loop. And maybe if you want one to be a bit longer, you can just kind of do it manually. It does also hold, which is great for doing kind of droney stuff. Allophone module next to it, which is 4 low frequency oscillators. Again, these just kind of like create a bunch of shapes, but it's got lots of outs, which is very handy. This is really boring. This is an attenuverter, and it just lets you shrink or flip signals. So you can take, you know, a positive envelope and then flip it and use it to turn things down. I'll get over to this one in a minute. Really nice reverb, designed by a guy called Tom Erb, who runs SoundHack. I don't know if anyone's got any of the SoundHack plugins. They're free, they're from like 2003, but they're like the best plugins in the world still. He's a genius. He did a talk on designing this module that is well interesting if you like kind of coding or just like general design of things. Random generator, this little kind of like sample player, which is the one I built, which only works 50% of the time because I built it. Big noisy dirty delay that we were using earlier. This is a granular processor. It's a little bit dated now, so it kind of aliases quite hard. It's a module called Clouds, which is a very kind of like one of the famous modules, but it's just a mini shrunk down version of it. Emily, who designs and is Mutable Instruments, who make Clouds, does everything as open source because she's wonderful. So after, you know, the main version got released, lots of people make mini versions of these. It's not as playable, which is one of the really nice things about Clouds. It's got nice big knobs on it, but it's quite handy to have a like granular processor you can use for looping. Again, that gets loads of vocals run through it live. Little mixer, inputs and outputs, which now that I've got the desk back, I'll probably get rid of. And then this is a box of dirt, which is a distortion, which is really weird. And it does, I'm not entirely sure how it works still, but if we stick a drum into it and see what it does. Let's see, what sound can we get out of you? That kind of sound. There we go. So it's a nice kind of classic overdrive, and it uses the dirt to ground the signal and then does some weird processing stuff. But you can do fun things like ground it through yourself, which is pretty cool. It's quite fun because if you put these both in your mouth, you can taste the sound. There is one thing worth noting with modular, there's like a 10 volt range. So sometimes if you take a really, really hot signal and out, you put it in your mouth, it goes on your tongue. It's a good way of testing things before you plug them in. But yeah, that's my case. Very kind of quick run through. But yeah, it's 2 voices to be used, kind of lots of sliders and lots of kind of functionality for quick like entry for things for using live, but then also lots of kind of ways that I can cross-modulate things and affect things for, you know, in the studio and for doing kind of like sound design work.
Can you like use like a keyboard with it? Like can you like plug in MIDI?
Yeah, well, so there isn't a MIDI in this case at the moment. Yeah. I've got a little box, a little external box, which is a MIDI to CV converter, and that's how I use the Electribe to sequence everything. So the Electribe's got like a kind of keyboard style sequencer in it. That then runs MIDI into the box, that then takes your MIDI information and translates it into voltage.
So it kind of depends on like what oscillator you're using, because some of them have like MIDI input.
Yeah. So some oscillators now have a MIDI input. Not a massive amount, but quite a few do, especially some of the ones that are. So this is kind of a like a broken down voice. So you've got, in the same way that with a synth voice you have an oscillator, a VCA, an envelope, a filter. Here you've got that, but they're all separate. You can get modules which are just standalone voices, which are just a whole thing in one, which are great ways of getting started, and also really, really good for kind of live stuff. Some of those have MIDI input, so you can just bash a MIDI cable into it and go straight from there. But otherwise, there are loads of modules that do MIDI to CV converting, and there's also quite a lot of things that will do it just straight off USB now. There's a really good company called Expert Sleepers who do a bunch of modules that are basically just designed for hooking this up straight to a computer. They do interfaces. They've got one called the FH2, which is a USB host. So you can just plug like any bog standard cheap USB MIDI keyboard into it, and it will just translate the output of that straight to CV, and you can just use that. You know, your like 20 quid weird MIDI keyboard that you got when you were like 12 for making tunes. You can just bang that straight in and it'll work. So that's the nice thing with this kind of, there's been a bit of a boom in modular over the last few years, which is obviously great if you own a modular shop. I don't own the modular shop, I just work there. But you know, it's great that more people are getting into it. And what that also means is that it's a lot easier to like interface stuff and to include things. It used to be, if you wanted, you know, to use modular for making music, you'd have to have like massive walls of it, and you know, all modules only did one thing. If you wanted 12 LFOs, you'd have to buy 12 LFO modules. Whereas now it's getting a lot smaller, and also we're starting to see more people kind of building very specific things for things like those interfaces. You can have like a little case that's just got some mad, you know, effects in it and some weird oscillators, things like the Teritas. You can just smack that in a case, have that, you know, get an interface or a way of linking that straight to your computer. Ableton have CV tools now, which just lets you kind of directly interface Ableton with modular if you've got a kind of module to do the translating. But it's really easy now. It's really, really easy, and you can do, you know, you can, I think we see quite a lot of people coming in and just having like little cases for little things, you know, like effects processing, just I want a weird drum machine, some synths for things, some stuff for kind of like processing, just modulation for like recording in, just getting some really unusual, completely random, never repeating modulation on things you can do really easily. And it's nice having the hands-on approach, being able to go, oh, I want to turn this oscillator, this, you know, frequency up. There we go, cool, that's done. Okay, maybe down a bit. And just being able to kind of tweak stuff, and yeah, finding all those weird sweet spots, and the weird bits where things start to kind of crumble and fall apart, or where they get, you know, they process too fast and then they kind of bug out completely. And that's the point when you need to be recording, because sometimes you won't actually be able to get those things back again.